We're beginning the Russian Sphinx section of the book, a bit focused around Helena Blavatsky. A very age has its riddle. Helena Petrovna Blavatsky was the enigma of the 19th century. The publication of her letters and also those of Mahatmas Mori and Kut Humi cast a new fuller light upon her extraordinary personality. She is reveled as a woman in the memory of the living, not as a half mythical sibyl from the distant age or the Pythia of some ancient oracle. Though but a few decades have passed since Madame Blavatsky departed from this life, here is already a name to conjure with. She is the third person of a bewildering triad, Saint Germain, Cagliostro, and Blavatsky. As though by common consent, humanity attacks viciously and relentlessly anyone who assails the ineffability of the mediocre, dare to preach or even presume the order reigns behind the chaos of life, that anything in the universe other than man has intelligence, and an outraged society shows its claws but partly hidden by the semblance of its culture. Oppose the knowledge of the few to the ignorance of the many, and morons are provoked to a frenzy of resentment. A large portion of mankind has been baptized in the faith of the commonplace. Stupidity is the vogue, and all men dread to be out of style. The fear is not that the occultist may be wrong. The fear is that the occultist may be right. To the criminal we may give the benefit of the doubt. To the occultist, never. The criminal violates only our laws. The occultist, que di diable le importe, violates our sacred opinions. Like children, incapable of the emotions of maturity, we are pitifully deficient in our grasp of spiritual values. Indifferent to the light given us and the efforts made for our improvement, we permit our petty ambitions to overshadow higher values. We tolerate every form of error, but are utterly intolerant of truth. We are generous toward any state but that of wisdom, which, when recognized, we swear to destroy. Occultism is regarded as a synonym for impostor. The philosopher can hardly expect a better fate than hemlock or the rude in an age when the learned are too busily engaged in condemnation even to investigate the objects of their ire. Misunderstanding is for the most part lack of understanding. This is particularly true in the world's attitude toward Madame Blavatsky. She fearlessly voiced beliefs that contemporary thinkers dared not entertain, even in the sanctum sanctorum of their own souls. One materialistic scientist voiced the scorn of all his tribe when he declared that the 19th century began in science but ended in superstition. He fails to explain how it was that so noble a beginning came to so sorry an end. The closing quarter of the last century witnessed a metaphysical revolt against the crassness of a physical science fascinated by phenomena. Lost in our effort to ascertain whether man ascended or descended from the ape, learning became so absorbed in determining where we had come from that it had no time left to perceive either where we are going or how we are to get there. To many scientists, religion is linked with superstition, and Newton is the only true avatar of force or matter, depending upon the school. The sophists, industrially building their structure of facts upon premises, have overlooked, however, certain equations in human nature. They forget that men grow more rapidly from the contemplation of ideals than from the memorization of scientific dogma. Reduced to famine straits by the emptiness of scientific thought, the sole hunger ever present in human nature demands a more nutritive food. If the occult sciences be classed as heresies by the Siloists, if the occult sciences be classed as heresies by the Siloists, the latter have only themselves to blame, for if material learning had not relegated God to the limbo of discarded notions, it would not be necessary for men and women of heroic vision to rise up and reinstate the Creator upon his universal throne. Upon the night of July 30th, 1831, at Ekaterinoslav, Ekaterinoslav, H.P. Blavatsky, then Mademoiselle Hahn, was ushered into the world amidst coffins and desolation due to the plague of cholera then raging throughout Europe. As an omen, this circumstance was further augmented by the strange fact that the robes of the Greek Catholic priest, hastily called for the baptism, caught fire during the ceremony, and several persons were more or less seriously burned. From the records of the Hahn family, we learned that the child, from her tenderest years, was constantly in an atmosphere of curious legends and peasant fancies. Russian folklore is rendered so rich and vivid by contact with Asiatic traditions that she could not recall a time when she did not possess only a firm belief in the existence of superphysical worlds with their supermundane inhabitants, but a somewhat accurate conception of the roles enacted by these visible beings in the life of mortals. Such environmental conditions during these impressionable years released the occult potentialities, thus preparing a sustainable foundation for that which was to follow. From her earliest childhood, writes her aunt, she was unlike any other person, very lively and highly gifted, full of humor and most remarkable daring. She struck everyone with astonishment by her self-willed and determined actions. Her restless and very nervous temperament, one that led her into most unheard of ungirlish mischief, her unaccountable, especially in those days, attraction to, and at the same time fear of, the dead, her passionate love and curiosity for everything known and mysterious, weird and fantastic, and foremost of all, her craving for independence and freedom of action, a craving that nothing and no one could control. All this combined with an exuberance of imagination and a wonderful sensitiveness ought to have warned her friends that she was an exceptional creature, to be dealt with and controlled by means as exceptional. Each passing year found Mill Hahn a more stormy vortex of occult forces. She moved in an atmosphere of unrealities, and her presence nothing seemed impossible. In her temperament were mingled the profundity of Merlin and the mischief of a Puck. It was as though a troop of sprites were in constant attendance, ever mindful of her bidding. Her uncanny prophetic powers by turns amazed and discomfited visitors. Her uncanny prophetic powers by turns amazed and discomfited visitors for looking them intently in the face, like some Pythoness of Delphi. In half-formed childish words, she would solemnly predict the place and time of their death. A Piscinet has noted that her prognostications were so correct that she became the terror of the domestic circle. Nothing could be concealed from her that she desired to know. She could read the most hidden thoughts and motives, and was instantly aware of circumstances occurring at a distance. Her aunt adds that the little mystic was both somnambulistic and somniloquent. She would hold in her sleep long conversations with unseen personages, some of which were amusing, some edifying, some terrifying. For those who gathered about the child's bed, in various occasions while apparently in an ordinary sleep, she would answer questions put by persons who took hold of her hand about lost property or other subjects of momentary anxiety, as though she were a sibyl entranced. Those acquainted with the mysteries of the invisible world realize that the mediumistic Milhan would have been swirled to her destruction by the forces of the astral light had she not been protected and overshadowed by a strength and intelligence greater than her own. In later years, Madame Blavatsky herself commented upon this, declaring that in every crisis of her life she sensed an imminent protection. On several occasions she was saved from almost certain death by the ministrations of an unseen friend, the significance of whose protection was not to be fully understood until future years. Among the strange forces and entities which intruded themselves upon her sensitive psychic organism was one utterly different from the rest and which remained constant to the end. At times she sensed the almost continuous presence of a tall, majestic, white-robed figure whose great benign eyes gazed down upon her. The glorious oriental luminous in his astral nature was the master of her dreams, and the passing years brought the ever-increasing conviction that, when the time was ripe, she would come to know objectively this adept whose influence had so definitely molded the substance of her subjective life. The year 1851 was of extraordinary significance to the Russian mystic. Madame Blavatsky was now 20 years of age and was visiting in London during the season of the International Exposition. She was already broken the bonds of family and country and stood at the very threshold of her adventurous life. As she was walking with her father one day, she saw an approaching number of Orientals, part of a group at that time visiting the court of Queen Victoria. In the midst of the Hindus was one of surpassing height and dignity. As her eyes turned toward him, a wave of astonishment swept over her. Her heart almost stopped beating, for she recognized in this Hindu of great demeanor the strange protector of her childhood visions, the one whose glorious countenance had shone down upon her from the invisible worlds. Her first impulse was to rush forward, to speak to him, to fall at his feet, but with princely gesture he bade her remain where she was and give no sign. So, helpless under the spell of his power, she stood still until he had passed by. To the uninitiated, the handsome Oriental was merely a Rajput prince, but to Madame Blavatsky he was the Master Moria, one of the world's greatest souls, an adept of the of the Trans-Himalayan Brotherhood, whose members are dedicated to the service of the spiritual needs of mankind. It was the evening following her first physical meeting with the Mahatma M. that Madame Blavatsky, impelled by a force she could not then understand, strolled slowly through Hyde Park. She was lost in reverie, turning over and over in her mind the almost unbelievable adventure of the day. Suddenly she looked up, and there before her stood the very person who had formed the subject of her reverie. Madame Blavatsky was a creature of destiny, and, as the steel is drawn to the lodestone, so the Russian mystic was impelled by fate into the way prepared for her. In London, by the Serpentine, wrote Madame Blavatsky in her diary, I met the master of my dreams concerning the Rajput adept. Very little information is available. Although known to Madame Blavatsky as the Mahatma Maurya, he seems to have also used the name Ahazurhalma, Ahazur, Ahaz, Ahazhulama, or the Blue Teacher, and according to the conservative records of the day, was 125 years of age at the time of his visit to England. The portrait of Mahatma Maurya, here published for the first time, was painted under the direction of Madame Blavatsky, who seems to have been satisfied with the accuracy of his likeness. The Mahatma visited Paris in the latter part of the 19th century and was also in America for a short time. He traveled, however, in great secrecy, accompanied by Oriental attendants, and met but a few people. 3 years before her meeting with Mahatma M. Milhan, when a girl of 17 was married on a dare to General Nicephore, Blavatsky, who gave his age as 50, but who was probably considerably older. They remained together for 3 tempestuous months, at the end of which the high-spirited young woman gathered up her belongings and departed for Tiflis. Her marriage is the only significant in that she gained therefrom the name that was to become the most important in the field of modern occultism. Then began a period of wandering, covering approximately 10 years, during which time the young countess, forced onward by her craving for knowledge and adventure, visited the most inaccessible corners of the earth. Her travels carried her through Central Asia, India, South America, Africa, and Eastern Europe. At one time she was exploring the ruins of the Mayan civilizations at Chichen Itza and Uxmal, at another, delving into the archives of the library of the Tashi Lama in the grim old monastery of Tashi Ihunpo. According to Sefariel, she was wounded 5 times in some way involved in the fortunes of Garibaldi in Italy. She also attended secret voodoo meetings in the Negro district of New Orleans, examined the rites of the dervishes and the Druzes, and was presumably initiated into the latter order, and explored the mysteries of the Yambushi of Japan. In the early 50s, she revisited the United States and crossed the Rocky Mountains to San Francisco in an immigrant train. From Java and the Straits settlements to Berlin, Vienna, and Paris, traces can be found of her search during this entire period for those fragments of ancient and forgotten truths which, when organized by the light which came to her, in latter life, became the foundation of her amazing literary works. Here is Mahatma Kut Hum Lal Singh, Master KH, and Master Muria will be on the, where my finger will be pointing. This was the guy. This is some other guy. That must be, I don't really know. But this one I know. That's the guy of her spiritual guide or whatever. No sketch of Madame Blavatsky's life, however brief, could be considered complete without mentioning the occult phenomena with which she was continually surrounded until she turned definitely therefrom in the closing years of her life. She discovered that the astonishment produced by her miracles was not a healthy reaction. The great and small gathered to witness phenomena, but for the most part without sensing in any measure the occult principles involved. Man cannot be truly converted by that which he sees or feels without his outer senses. Enlightenment is an inner conviction, a realization of spiritual values, and, as a general rule, those interested in mystery or marvel are unsuited for profounder issues. Worse still, Madame Blavatsky's transcendental powers, ridiculed by the worldly wise, gained for her only a reputation of impostor. The curious came not to discover realities, but to detect fraud, and no amount of fact can shake minds closely by fixed predeterminations. The intelligentsia she was to discover were not interested in philosophy, but her miracles were always amusing, yes, perplexing, and even irritating. From childhood, Madame Blavatsky moved in an atmosphere of the miraculous. Objects appeared and disappeared, as though at the whim of some prankish pixie. Bells tinkled in the empty air, and soft music issued from nowhere. These phenomena gave H.P.B. Helena P. Blavatsky, as she was affectionately called, quite an astonishing reputation as a medium. The distinction which she ferociously disclaimed. From the beginning, the very persons who insisted upon demonstration of her occult powers made every effort possible to convict her of chicanery. Anyone acquainted with the natural limitations of legerdemain, however, must admit that many of her demonstrations were wholly beyond the possibility of fraud. Though bewildered by Madame Blavatsky's particular powers, the skeptics remained adamant. The mysterious Madame took an exquisite delight in discomforting these unbelievers who refused to accept that which they themselves knew to be true. Take, for example, the young professor who attended some of the gatherings of sensation-seekers in Madame Blavatsky's apartments. Rappings had been heard upon the walls and furniture, but he was a doubting Thomas, peering about in search of hocus pocus. H.P.B. was seated on the far side of the room, apparently indifferent to the depreciatory remarks of her unconverted guest. Suddenly, to the professor, there occurred a most unscientific thing. The wrappings localized themselves upon the inside of his eyeglasses, becoming so strong that the spectacles were fairly lifted off of his nose, leaving him overcome by mingled confusion and fear. On another occasion, a very vain and sophisticated lady brought upon herself a sharp reprimand for her unbelief. She had been asking some foolish questions, attempting to show superiority by the flippancy of her attitude. As the incident is described by Signet, she suddenly became very pale and, jumping from her chair, covered her mouth with her hand. Her face was actually convulsed with fear and astonishment. Those gathered about looked at each other significantly, for previous events to her own confession, they realized that she had felt the spirits tapping her own mouth. As she herself admitted afterwards, there was a most violent commotion issuing from the gold of her artificial teeth. At the hotel in Alexandria, Madame Blavatsky and a friend were seated on a sofa talking. Before them, on a small tabouret, was a tray bearing a bottle of liqueur, some wine, a wineglass, and a tumbler. As the gentleman raised the glass to his lips, it was shattered in his hands. Madame Blavatsky gleefully remarked that she not only had a dislike for liqueurs, but could hardly tolerate those who used them too freely. Though amazed by the circumstance, her companion lied like a gentleman, declaring the glass to be thin, probably cracked, and the whole affair of no moment, it being quite ridiculous to infer that she had been any party to the happening. All the time he knew that the glass had been strong and thick, but he wanted to draw Madame out to discover, if possible, some of her mysteries. HPB became very serious in her eyes, flashed at the convert challenge in the inference of her friend's words. "What will you bet," she asked, "that I do not do it again? If you do," was the retort, "I will be the first to proclaim you a true magician. If not, we will have a good laugh at you or your spirits tomorrow at the consulate." With these words, the challenger half filled the tumbler with wine and lifted it slowly to his mouth. But just as the glass touched his lips, he felt it so violently shattered between his fingers that his hand bled, a cut by a broken piece of glass, as he instinctively gripped the tumbler when he felt it slipping from his grasp. It's a kind of detailed picture. Not really sure. Okay, well, a pencil sketch made by HPB in a dark room during a period not exceeding 30 minutes. Wow. In spite of the years that have elapsed since HPB's passing, new testimonials of her occult powers continued to be brought to light. Not long ago, a man who had been a janitor in a house where she had lived passed on in one of our soldiers' homes. To the end, her preserved and vivid recollection of the notes in different handwritings on slips of varicolored paper, which he had seen falling in showers from the ceiling of her room. He had watched her gather up these slips, sort of arrange them, and apparently derive therefrom information for her numerous books and articles. It was his duty as a janitor to gather the slips she discarded and burn them in the furnace. Another incident quite as remarkable was also recalled from the dim memory of the past by a lady when brought face to face with the photograph of Madame Blavatsky, which is reproduced at the frontispiece of this article. HPB sat huddled on a park bench in a well-known American city. Suddenly, from around the bend there approached a tall Oriental, who, in the words of the amazed witness, was totally invisible from the waist down. The apparition conversed with the Madame for a few moments, and then glided away as it had come. It is difficult to believe that such things can really happen in the prosaic atmosphere of America in the 19th century. In her 1,001 Nights amid the enchantments of bold Baghdad, Scheherazade never spun tales more fantastic. Madame Blavatsky had, in some accountable way, contacted the occult soul of Asia cannot be doubted. She was in every sense an Oriental occultist, a faithful disciple of Eastern masters. Her particular personal qualifications were recognized by those illumined adepts whose task it is to perpetuate the esoteric philosophy, and at the same time guard its sacred truths from the profane. No other non-Hindu woman has ever penetrated so far into the adytum to Brahmanism. Concerning Madame Blavatsky's achievements in Oriental learning, Rai B.K. Lahir wrote, "Is it not sufficient for the Westerners to know that a proud Brahmin, who knows not how to bend his body before any mortal being in this world, except his superiors in relation to religion, joins his hands like a submissive child before the white yogini of the West?" The open sesame by which HPB caused the door of Eastern wisdom to swing open before her was her keen and unfailing realization of values. She fitted together the parts of occult lore as no other thinker in modern times has done, dividing with a sure hand relevancy from irrelevancy. She culled and collated, and by the artistry of her genius enshrined her precious findings in a pagoda of golden thoughts. G.R.S. Mead refers to Madame Blavatsky's temperament as racy and bohemian. What he really intends to imply was an extreme unconventionality and utter indifference to the opinions of others. In a day when gentlewomen rode side saddle, HPB would gallop astride on her mount to the general dismay of her decorous kinsfolk. On a coach in England, the passengers also made it their special concern to pass her chair in order to gape at the unprecedented spectacle of a lady of noble birth rolling and smoking Russian cigarettes in public. Her detractors have tried to interpret her idiosyncrasies to the detriment of her character and work. Yet withal they have been unable to discover any evil or viciousness anywhere in her nature. Utterly true to the principles she believed, quick in the defense of those whom she considered to be in the right, generous in victory and philosophic in defeat, she went on her way, to paraphrase Kipling, doing the things she saw it for the God of things as they are. Doing the things as she saw for the God of things as they are. Okay? Madame Blavatsky was not a paragon of metaphysical perfections. In most respects, she was a perfectly normal human being, subject, like other mortals, to the reactions of pleasure and pain, of optimism and despair. High-spirited and impulsive, she chafed under the vicissitudes of fortune, and, though outwardly brusque and mannish, was gentle at heart and almost pathetically feminine. Her physical activities were such a continual strain upon her health that advancing years found her physical body broken as it was by the hardships of her younger years. Unequal to the demands placed upon it by her indomitable will, the Mahatma K.H., in explaining the tension under which she worked, called her a physiological cripple. He added that this condition resulted from the fact that one of her invisible bodies, or principles, was held in the temple wherein she received her instruction. This was done, 1. To form a link between herself and teachers, and 2. In order that she could never give out or betray certain secrets. In other words, part of her own nature was held as hostage for her integrity. Although the Mahatma says no more upon the subject, The conclusion is that it was necessary to do this, inasmuch as HPB herself was not an adept and therefore did not have the freedom of action accorded to those who have passed all the necessary tests or initiations. Those who recognized the extraordinary knowledge of HPV and the importance of its dissemination to the world gladly overlooked the irascibilities and inconsistencies of her temperament, serving not the woman personality but through her the masters who had sent her forth as the most suitable vehicle procurable for their purposes at that time. Not infrequently is the question asked, what were the peculiar qualities which so eminently fitted HPB to be entrusted with the difficult task of introducing the ancient wisdom to the modern world? She had the true attitude toward the relation of pupil and teacher. She was utterly consecrated to the consummation of the task which had been given her. Every personal activity being subservient to this end, she was uncompromising where matters of principle were involved. One of the masters said of her that much of her difficulty sprang from her inability to assume the semblance of dissimulation. She was also utterly unselfish, seeking no personal glory and continually sacrificing her own comfort and security for what she felt was the greatest good. HPB was in every sense a dominating personality. Her enthusiasm was contagious. She was indifferent to her own spiritual development, being perfectly satisfied to act as the amanuensis, to be a pen in the hand of a ready writer. One of the Mahatmas, in commenting upon her temperament, declared that she was too emotional to achieve the highest degree of illumination, but it is the same emotion which impelled her to forswear, like Avalokiteshvara, her own perfection, and come back with a message of hope and enlightenment to a world which she loved in spite of what it did to her. Sincerity, conviction, unselfishness, these were integral elements in HPB's nature, and these were the elements that justified the master's choice. Add to these qualities her psychic sensitivity and the high order of her literary skills, and it will be evident why the great school chose her as its mouthpiece. Madame Blavatsky's literary style was as vital and dynamic as her personality. She supported herself by journalism for a number of years, and although many of her earlier articles have never been translated from the Russian, enough have found their way into English to establish the brilliancy, novelty, and individuality of her style. Nor is wit lacking. When the need arose, hers was a sharp pen indeed, vide particularity, Isis unveiled, a modern Paronion, the Nightmare Tales, also established her reputation as a capable writer of fiction, although the heavy responsibilities of her occult labors left little opportunity to indulge this talent. Madame Blavatsky did not suffer from that. Where am I? Madame Blavatsky did not suffer from that ponderosity of literary style which afflicts most profound thinkers. Even the most technical pages of her textbooks have a fascination which holds the reader to the end. She was a prodigious worker, and while engaged in the penetration of the secret doctrine, would arise daily at 5, except on rare occasions when her health did not permit, and would finish quite a sheaf of manuscript before breakfast. She kept no hours, but, interruptions permitting, would work far into the night. The abstruse nature of the subject matter often necessitates several writings before her masters would approve the material. Her financial condition did not permit any extensive library, and she never at any time had in her possession most of the volumes quoted in her writings. As she herself explained it, the books seemed to appear in the air before her, so that she could read from their reflections in the astral light. Madame Blavatsky's greatest miracles are her books, and by her writings she is elevated far beyond the reach of her culminators. Her literary accomplishments and not materialized teacups are the hallmark of her genius. The combined intellectual abilities of her detractors are insufficient to approach, let alone duplicate, the achievements of one woman given up as dying by her physicians. Who else in the last 1,000 years has had the knowledge of the courage to restate the spiritual varieties which the world had believed lost forever, buried beneath the crumbling temples of classical antiquity? The secret doctrine and Isis unveiled are Madame Blavatsky's gift to humanity, and to those whose vision can pierce the menacing clouds of imminent disaster, it is no exaggeration to affirm that these writings are the most vital literary contributions to the modern world. No more can they be compared with other books than can the light of the sun be compared with the lamp of a glowworm. The secret doctrine assumes the dignity of a scripture, for in its pages eternal mysteries are clothed in an ancient and modern terms, and to those who have eyes to see, and the ageless wisdom is revealed. We like to think of the secret doctrines as a magnificent agglomeration of facts circumscribed by we like to think of the secret doctrine as a magnificent agglomeration of facts circumscribed and ensouled by an overwhelming realization of the most recondite principles of life. Madame Blavatsky has been accused of plagiarism. That the words of countless writers embellished her text is not to be denied, but the old words are in new patterns and the previous writers are made to support premises of which they themselves had never conceived. Words must always be old. The greatness of the secret doctrine lies in the pointing or focusing of the facts contained therein, for out of the mass of old material is fused a new idea. Out of the ashes of dead beliefs once more rises the deathless phoenix. The book which the masters precipitated through their faithful Clea has become so distinctly a part of the literature of the race that neither criticism nor indifference can ever detract from the measure of its power. For this age, then, the study of the secret doctrine is the logical approach to occultic philosophy. Compressed between the covers of this book is to be found the essence of indefatigable research. For the student of mysticism, seeking authentic information on the transcendental sciences, this book is the best available authority on the subject. Nearly all books on occultism written subsequent to the secret doctrine are in some way derived therefrom. Unfortunately, however, few of the later writers correctly interpret the material which they borrowed. To draw a parallel from the Neoplatonists, we may say that the secret doctrine is the summit of that occult literature from which depend, like ineffable blossoms, a multitude of cults and isms having no luminescence in their own right, but existing solely by virtue of the light diffused from this single achievement. From this point of view, the secret doctrine should not be regarded as a monument to the personal learning of H.P. HPB, but rather to those adepts whose presence constitutes a far higher source of information than is available to the average author. The Secret Doctrine is a book within a book, or, as the Kabbalists would have termed it, a luminous soul obscured by an outer vestment of words. The first and smaller part of the book, the soul of the whole world, is the truly occult portion. The second and more voluminous, the part the vestment of many words, consists of HPB's commentaries thereon. To the uninitiated reader whose faculties of discrimination are undeveloped, these two distinct works are mingled in seemingly hopeless confusion. However, the Suratma, the Sutratma, however, the Sutratma, or the sole thread upon which the beads of commentary are strung, winds in and about an almost terrifying mass of corroborative and explanatory text. Primitive ideas are traced through countless ramifications and applications until the intellect becomes dazed in the effort to follow the many divergences of perspective. Primitive ideas are traced through countless ramifications and applications until the intellect becomes dazed in the effort to follow the many divergences of perspective. Fugitive ideas intrude themselves only to escape before they are apprehended. For this reason, the Secret Doctrine is, for too many occultists, a textbook in name only. The occult dilettante who seeks to acquire the veneer of wisdom does not linger long over its pages, but soon discouraged transfers his attention to less weighty material. No one unable to understand the elements of the Secret Doctrine can expect to achieve the heights to which it beckons true scholarship. Those who find it beyond their comprehension should realize that the fault is not with the book, but with themselves. Spiritual truths can never be brought down to the level of the unenlightened masses. Failure has crowned every such effort in the past. There is but one alternative. By his own efforts, man must lift himself up to the level of truth. He must develop the faculties which enable him to appreciate the profounder aspects of learning. Truth cannot descend, but man can and must ascend. Only through the release of his own potential divinity does the initiate become qualified to comprehend the great arcanum. The multitude of issues found in the several departments of the Secret Doctrine all diverge from certain fundamental premises, and having revealed their forms and purposes, finally reconverge to these original premises. The Mahatmas through whom the teachings were given, being self-admittedly of Buddhistic persuasion, and the stanzas of Dzyan, the skeleton of the whole work being a commentary on the Buddhistic scriptures, it must be evident that the viewpoint of the writing is essentially Buddhistic. The book, however, is inclusively rather than exclusively Buddhistic. As a philosophy, Buddhism is primarily concerned with the disposition, As a philosophy, Buddhism is primarily concerned with the dissipation of ignorance through a knowledge and realization of the illusionary state of all material substances, natures, interests, and attachments. In this respect, Buddhism reflects the essential tenets of nearly all great religions and philosophical institutions. As a book, The Secret Doctrine affirms the existence of a primitive knowledge perpetuated from age to age and race to race by institutions of illumined thinkers. These illustrious mortals have been overshadowed and guided by adepts or initiates, members of certain hierarchical orders, to whom the destiny of humanity has been entrusted for certain periods of its development. If these premises be accepted, and the book itself is irrefutable evidence of a learning transcending that professed by the moderns, then that which follows is quite evident and consistent. The secret doctrine, the sanctuaries of the ancient mysteries, are made to give up many of their most precious secrets concerning the nature of the world and the human soul. The enlightened philosophers of every age contribute to the completeness of the book. The evidence adduced in support of the occult sciences is undeniable, and it must become evident even to those of narrow vision that the great religious systems whose varieties have been in conflict since the beginning are in reality restatements of a single occult tradition whose beginnings were coeval with the human race. Great purposes are always opposed by the littleness inherent in human nature, but the secret doctrine is an irresistible force, sweeping aside smugness and conceit and forcing the mind into honest ways, afraid to open his eyes lest that which he sees will conflict with that which he believes. The textualist, that bourbon of the world of thought, to paraphrase Huxley, who learns not, neither can he forget, rebels against the vastness, the majesty, and the sublimity of its concepts. Occultism in the Western world owes all that it is to the pioneering of H.P. Blavatsky. Her tireless efforts are responsible in no small measure for the freedom Her tireless efforts are responsible in no small measure for the freedom and tolerance accorded metaphysical speculations in this century. Remove H.P. Blavatsky, and the structure of modern occultism falls like a house of cards. The secret doctrine contains practically all that is known on the subject of occultism that is permissible to print, and every page is a variable treasure house of esoteric lore. The secret doctrine could have produced in the 19th century is well nigh incredible. It is utterly different in both spirit and substance from the products of the racial trend. Produced in an era of crass materiality, this extraordinary document rescues spiritual values from oblivion, restating them in this Kali Yuga of science. H.P. Blavatsky herself realized that her writings were out of sympathy with the age, and that the full significance of the secret doctrine could not be fully recognized until the advent of a more auspicious time. It was to be the occult textbook of the 20th century, to stand without addition or subtraction until the coming of the next emissary of the masters, which, according to H.P.B., was to be about 1975. Muhammad well said that each age has its book. The secret doctrine is unquestionably the magnum opus of the literature of the modern world. Madame Blavatsky died on May 8, 1891. In the words of Isabel Cooper Oakley, she passed away like a sentinel at his post in the armchair in which she taught and wrote. The best and truest of teachers, the most faithful and untiring of messengers. She continued her writing to the last, and the night before her passing she remained for a short time at her desk, arranging her papers and struggling with a half-finished editorial. She retained possession of her faculties to the end, and, though suffering much in her final illness, her last moments were peaceful, and those supporting her scarcely knew when she ceased to breathe. What more fitting termination to this article on the Russian Sphinx than her own admonition? Should this be my last word, I would implore you all, as you regard for the welfare of mankind and your own karma, to be true to the society, and not to permit it to be overthrown by the enemy. H.P. Blavatsky. A mighty chapter today.